Hey Dad, you've been a funeral director now for a long time, 40 plus years. What are some of the key elements for helping with grieving at a farewell?
Yeah, so the three key elements are visual, auditory, and kinesthetic or touch. And those three elements are the elements we live by. That's why they're so important in our grief, because we grieve in the same way as we live. And I thought perhaps I'd start by talking about the visual elements of a farewell and why they're so important.
Is that visual element why people dress up at a funeral?
Traditionally it probably was. I think people would dress up in their Sunday best. They'd come along wearing their best attire to honour the deceased by what they're wearing. These days I think it's a little bit different. I think we see it more about being more natural. So I can remember in the days I started in funeral service, we had guys out the back making caskets, and occasionally we'd have to take them with us on a trip. And they would put the one suit that fitted all of them, and they just looked terrible. It wasn't honouring anyone. And if they just wore their cleanest work gear, I think that would be more appropriate. So, if you're a tradie coming to a tradie's funeral, wear your tradie gear. Maybe wear your clean shorts, not the dirty ones, but wear the gear that shows your connection to that person. And by doing that, you're helping your own grief.
So I'm guessing photo tributes and photo books come under that visual element as well.
Absolutely, yeah. So we do a lot of photo tributes at funerals now, and we often gather all that data, if you like, all those different photos from different members of the family. So they're seeing pictures they haven't necessarily all seen before. And what we do, we cheat at the end of it. We take all those photos and we print them in a book, because that's a permanent visual for them to take away, a free version for them to take away, of course. We don't charge them. But I think the secret with that is that some people are more visual than others. And so some people might say, don't want photos at my funeral. I just want more talking because I want the auditory stuff. But if someone else comes who doesn't like all that talking, and they want to see the flowers, they want to see the colour, they want to see the photos, and you take that away from them, you're actually taking away some of their ability to grieve well.
You mentioned flowers. Flowers are still a thing as well?
Yeah, so flowers are still a thing. Not so much, the old days we'd bring flowers to a funeral. Nowadays it's more about if they were a flower person, having lots of flowers. But if they're not a flower person, if you've got a golfer or tennis player or something like that, you bring the tennis gear or the golf gear, and that becomes your focus. You might still have some flowers. One of the great memories I have is of an actor who we did a service for, and at the end all we had was one red rose, like you see on TV, and at the end we got people to come forward and take a short red rose and put it in an upside down top hat. So it was a visual display, if you like, of each person's connection to that deceased.
What about viewing after death? That's a very
so
thing.
Viewing after death is a huge topic, but again, if we're talking visually, would a very visual person benefit from seeing someone? Would it help them accept the death? Well, the answer's in the word. If they're going to view the deceased, then yes, it most likely would. A lot of visual people won't want to see the deceased because it makes them face that reality. But it is generally good for them, even if they don't like what they see. It's a matter of connecting. If you're not a very visual person, maybe visiting and seeing the deceased won't have that same effect as it would for someone who was visual. Yeah.
Would that also lead on to having an open casket? Is that still common?
So we often have an open casket, but more in private. And I think as a culture we've learnt that an open casket for everyone is not good, because if you're not visual, that's going to offend you. But if you are visual, then you'd make the time to go and see that person privately or at home, like we've done with our own relatives. We always take them home. Anyone wants to see them can come home and actually spend time with them at home. Yeah.
Is the casket an important element as well?
Yes, of course. So the casket is a visual tribute to that person. Now, it doesn't have to be flash. For some people, if they are very earthy, a builder or a boatie or something, they might just want a simple casket with a rope handle. It could be that you create a simple casket into something very colourful, if the person was very colourful, or you can buy a colourful casket. So yeah, the casket, not necessarily what you spend on it, but how you make it a visual feature can be very important. Yeah.
What about For family or friends that can't make it physically to a funeral or are overseas, are there any visual things they can do to help them?
Streaming is a great way of connecting people in. I was telling a story to you before about a recent funeral where they were using Teams to actually give a live tribute, made them feel connected. They used 2 rooms because we encouraged the family overseas to gather in one space so they could physically support each other, that touch thing I'm going to talk about shortly, but very much the visual thing. They could sit and feel like they were a part of that service by streaming. Yeah.
If family are unable to make it to a stream for any reason, is there any other small things that might help?
Yeah, lots of things help. Probably the best one is a recording. Just about every stream has a recording so they can sit and watch from a visual perspective. People who are touch, and I'll talk about that later, often like to send something, a flowers or a gift basket or something, so they feel connected. And like I said, will gather with family around them rather than sitting on their own. Whereas a purely visual person will be quite happy sitting on their own watching the service.
What about the talking side of a funeral?
Yep, so the talking side, the auditory side, I'll talk about that in the next video.